Hello, I'm Alix.
I'm Kelly.
And this is the LaJoy Podcast.
Katherine Doyle and Katherine Webber are both best-selling and award-winning writers of YA and children's books. In addition to co-writing the Twin Crowns series, they are sister-in-laws.
So welcome, Katherine and Katherine, to the LaJoy Podcast. For our listeners, we read your bio already, so they know a little bit about you, but maybe tell us first what you both go by, because you have the same name, but slightly different, which is really fun. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I'm also technically Katherine Webber, as of marrying Katie's brother. But for the purpose of this interview, I am Katherine Doyle and I go by Kat. And I live in the west of Ireland, where I grew up. And I am an author of many books, primarily middle grade and YA.
And I'm Katherine Webber, the original Katherine Webber, before Kat married my brother and also became Katherine Webber, further complicating our friendship. And I go by Katie. And yeah, similar to Kat, I also write middle grade and YA. And I'm so excited to be here on the LaJoy Podcast.
Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today.
It's fun to hear kind of about your origin story. I believe, Katie, you orchestrated the meet cute for Kat and your brother. So tell us maybe a tiny bit about that.
So Kat and I met because we share a literary agent. Shout out to Claire Wilson, our shared agent. She actually just won Agent of the Year in the UK last year. So she's amazing. And we met and kind of became immediate friends, and we were both writing separately. And Kat is a brilliant writer. She's one of my all-time favorite writers, which is one of the reasons I very sensibly, if I say so myself, decided that we should co-write together. But before we ever started writing together, I actually introduced her to my brother because I thought she was such an excellent human. And they started dating. And then they did a long distance relationship from Ireland to California. And then they got engaged and are now married. So we are officially sisters-in-law, and I am absolutely delighted by it. Kat, do you have any from your perspective?
From my perspective, my perspective on my marriage. Yeah, I remember Katie and I love watching Katie tell the story because it's like, I love the pride and ownership you have over it. And I'm like a character in the book that you wrote. Yeah, I mean, I met Katie for the first time probably going up on 10 years ago now. And it was just that alchemy of meeting someone in kind of your 20s and being like, where have you been all my life? And I suppose for me, it's rare to like, be at this age and to kind of have that like giddy feeling like when you're a child and you just think, I want you to be my best friend. But I was struck by her sunny disposition. I thought she was just a really extraordinary writer and a really fun person to be around. And I do remember joking early on to Katie. I remember thinking, oh, you have a brother. I would marry him sight unseen if he's kind of half as great as you are. And then I met Jack and he was just as great, the same level of greatness, is Katie. And I just said, sign me up. So yeah, we did a long distance for about 18 months. And then Jack said, I don't like the sun in California. I prefer Irish rain. And he moved here. And now we have a dog together and we're married.
The dog named Callie in honor of California.
Oh, cute.
Okay, so we both just finished Twin Crowns and we have not started book 2 yet because we were trying to start it exactly at the same time. So I just got caught up. And we actually have like an amazing team of readers who is very particular about the books we pick and put in our crates. And we had multiple readers in-house who were like, you have to read Twin Crowns. And so we purposefully waited until the podcast so that it was all fresh. I just finished this morning and I'm like so irritated that I didn't read book 2.
I know.
Because it's like cliffhanger.
I know.
I'm like so excited. Okay, so I want to know a little bit about that writing process. I bet you get asked this all the time. So I just want to get this question out of the way because how do you co-write a book together?
Well, it began as most good decisions in my life as a suggestion from Katie. So it was like at the start of the pandemic, Katie called me up and we were both writing different books on our various deadlines. And she just said, you know what, I really want to write something fun. And Katie and I both love fantasy. We had never written in that space individually. But, a lot of our early conversations and bondings were around our favorite fantasy books like Sarah J. Maas, Leigh Bardugo, those kind of authors, Laini Taylor. Mm-hmm. So Katie said, do you want to try and write a fantasy book together about twin princesses separated at birth? And immediately I was all in. It just sounded so fun. It was such a special concept. It just came at exactly the right time. But also, I don't think what Katie realized about me is that I'm a real executor. So when there's an idea, we have to do it like immediately. So Katie was like, let's like give it some thought and like get back to me. And I think less than a week later, I was like, we have to name the twins and we have to start writing right now, because I was so excited.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like we're talking to ourselves.
We have parallel lives.
I was like, we're feeling this.
We have to do it right now, completely. And then it just gathered momentum.
So Kat is genuinely one of my favorite writers. And I also think she's hilarious. And I wanted to write a true YA kind of fantasy rom-com, because I feel like in fantasy space, both Kat and I write middle grade, and there's a lot of room for humor when it comes to fantasy, kind of like magic going wrong and that kind of thing. And I hadn't at the time like really seen that done in the YA space. And I was like, Kat's the funniest person I know. She's a brilliant writer. I love fantasy so much. I was kind of intimidated at the thought of doing like a YA fantasy on my own. And I was like, I'll have so much fun with Kat. And as she said, I called her up and she was excited about it. And it's true. She said, once we named the twins, we knew we wanted to have like a princess and a witch. We wanted to have them really separate type of lives, really lean into kind of, almost like fantasy stereotypes, for lack of a better phrase. And we knew immediately. Kat was like, I'm going to do the witch. And I was like, I'm going to do the spoiled princess. And so we do write, kind of going back to your original question, the logistics of it are, so Kat writes Ren and I write Rose, but we edit each other as we go. So we send each other our chapters and edit them. And then we also plan everything together. So that's for me, one of the most fun parts. We sit down and we would do these like 6-hour epic calls where we would start, first really big ideas and then go, more and more specific until we have very detailed chapter outlines. We always knew what was coming next. But that said, even though we always knew what was coming next, like when Kat was sending a chapter where like I knew there would be a kiss coming, I'd get so excited. And in the writing process, some like new things would pop up, or I'd call Kat and be like, oh, this thing isn't working. But what's amazing is like we felt such a shared ownership over both twins, even though, we wrote separate ones. So it was really, that was how we did it for all 3 books.
That's amazing. I have kind of a thought where you're talking about the tropes, and there was so many times where it was with Rose and Chem where I was like, this is so Claire and Jamie. Like,
like Outlander?
Yeah.
Jamie's the physical inspiration for Tor, actually.
Oh my gosh.
Love Outlander. When my husband proposed to me, he used a 20th edition, anniversary edition of Outlander. Like, I love that. So yes, that you absolutely read into that correctly.
So really quick, when you guys were writing Twin Crowns, were you both based where you are now, like in Ireland and London?
Yeah, we weren't. It was pandemic rules. So I think we just literally weren't allowed to leave our respective countries for most of it. But there was this lull in the pandemic when Katie was allowed to fly and Ireland opened again for a brief period of time. So she came to stay with me in Galway. And I remember vividly, we were at my parents' house. My parents were watching Evie, and we were in the kitchen and we were doing the scene where Ren and Rose first meet again, kind of for the first time, and they kind of argue and they're like, Rose is really mad and they're like mad at each other, and Katie and I were like method acting it out, sort of like, and how could you do this to me? And Katie was at the other end of the table being like, no, and my mom was at the oven making dinner and was just like, okay, like had no concept of what we were doing or what we were writing. But it was that was really fun because we got to write that kind of explosive moment together. But for most of the book, really, we were apart.
Yeah, and we would occasionally, for scenes, especially at the beginning, we would do for scenes where both the girls were together. We would actually go into a Google Doc and kind of like talk, like write simultaneously while we were on the phone. But then as the series went on, we obviously became much more confident and comfortable in both of their voices. I have to Burning Crowns, the 3rd book in the trilogy, is about to come out, and Kat, basically, I'm terrible at battle scenes. I cannot do battle scenes. So Rose chapters that have battles, I was like, Kat, you gotta, over to you on this one. So she's so good at those.
It's just, Rose standing in a forest yelling at everyone, and I just do the sword movements or whatever, or like physically move her about the scene. But the dialogue is always very good.
So it was, we loved being able to do the kind of chapters like when we could do them together. And then as pandemic did lift, we did have a few times we were able to kind of work together at the same time. And as Kat said, her parents were so great. And like I have my daughter at the time was around 1.5 as well. And so we would go her parents would help watch my daughter while we were working, because small children hinder writing process.
I know when we talked about this when we started our company, we both had like a 1 and a 3-year-old, and we basically had time to work between nap time and after they went to bed.
It's amazing how much you can get done when you're like, I've got this amount of time to get it done, so I'll make it work somehow.
You mentioned kind of the battle scenes. And then I know that in your Q&A, you talked about the romance scenes. And so I'm like, they both have kind of strangely the same writing mechanisms required, where you're like, where's all the body parts and what's the motion and like, where are they in relation to one another? And so I'd love to kind of know a little bit more about writing the romance scenes and reading each other's romance scenes. And what was that like?
I love romantic stories. So the romance scenes are always my favorite to write and my favorite to read. So I think when we started out planning Twin Crowns, Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, we had an idea of all the kind of tropes that we wanted to include in the book.
And I want a library kiss. So there's like a scene, this is a small spoiler if people have not read Twin Crowns yet, but there is a kissing scene in a library, because I was like, I want to have that. Or like, I was like, I love a hot spring. So I was like, I want to, quite a steamy scene in a hot spring. And it was so fun coming up with, all of the ideas. But what was amazing is we knew we had a series, stuff that we couldn't fit into book 1, tropes that we loved, the scenes that we could really picture, we were able to put in book 2. And like, for example, Ren has a library kiss scene, and so Kat wrote it, but I was so excited to be like, please, can we put this in? So that's so fun about working collaboratively, is you're able to almost do, put more into the book, because we had 2 distinct love stories. So we were able to, give everyone exactly what they wanted, hopefully. And our aim was to have them kind of develop in kind of different vibes. So no matter what kind of romance reader you are, you'd be like, oh, this is the ship that I'm rooting for, or, oh, I really like these ones, or ideally, both of them.
Yeah. And inevitably I would, when I was doing the romance scenes, put in too much spice, and Katie and my editors would be like, no. But I'd always see how far I could push it.
Oh my gosh. So a long follow-up question on that one is, how do you know when the right level of spice for the readership? What's kind of your barometer? Because I feel like you could write just full romantasy adult fiction. What's the barometer for you on like spice level?
I love this question. We've spoken about it a lot. So as a reader, I love a bit of spice in books. But specifically for Twin Crowns, we wanted it to be a book that I would feel confident giving to like a 13-year-old. We've got some, so it's more, and as the series progresses, stuff does spice up a little bit, but it's still very much like kind of closed door at the end of the day, and we want to feel earned. And for me, like, I love reading and writing like the kissing scenes, those and the yearning. And that's for me kind of where the real like sexiness, for lack of a better word, kind of comes into it. So I think for Twin Crowns, it was a definite like decision that we made on kind of like the levels that we wanted. There's, if you're an adult, you're like, oh, I'm seeing some subtle hints at kind of what's going on here. But we felt like we were able to make it as romantic and swoony as we wanted, while still, making it that, anyone would feel any teenager would be comfortable reading. It was how I felt about it, Kat. I don't know.
And I think it also matches the tone of the book generally. Like, it matches the level of violence or the amount of fighting. It's kind of, in a lot of ways, we see it as like an exciting but entry level sort of fantasy that's not too overly complex and is a little bit lighter in tone in a lot of ways. So I think we just wanted to make sure that it was all even. So it was a pretty cohesive decision early on. And I do agree. I think when I like watch romance or read romance, it's like the tension and the breaking of the tension and that first kiss that's, I think, really irresistible. So we had a lot of fun with that, particularly obviously in Twin.
But I also love an undressing moments. There's a few I love the like, oh, and then the untying, whether you're doing love and undressing moments. So, so within reason. But it's a really interesting question that we were very kind of conscientious about when we were writing.
That makes sense. It was so funny because when I was a little ahead of the reading and I had just finished and you were about to start, and that was one of your questions, you're all, is there spice in it? Because I feel like that's been so much the genre that we've been talking about lately. Romance, it's just in general, been so popular. And I was like, there's so much good tension. Those exact words I said. I'm like, the tension is so good. I'm like, I promise you'll feel so satisfied. And I agree. It's perfect as you'd say, almost like introduction for fantasy, without it being full spice level for young adult.
or even too overwhelming in fantasy world building. Like, I love fantasy, but we wanted it to be a book. Like, we really wanted it to be accessible levels of fantasy that, like,
yes,
even readers were like, oh, I don't usually love fantasy. We were like, well, you will love Twin Crowns.
Yeah.
And, what's amazing, I think, about romance readers is, obviously a lot of romance readers do love spice, but I think what they really want is the romance, which you can have, like we were saying, with the tension and the kissing and the yearning.
You probably get this question a lot too, but what characters in the book do you most identify with, if any, or multiple?
I think I'm probably a mix of, I'm definitely Ren. She's super sarcastic, cynical. I think it's like the Irishisms in Ren. And a little bit of this character that's not really in book one, who comes out more in kind of 2 and 3, called Alaric Felsing. I feel like I'm probably a mix of those two. But I also love animals the way Tor loves animals.
I love Rose. I wouldn't say I'm a lot like her, but I loved leaning into kind of her. Where I'm like Rose is kind of optimistic to the point of delusion. And I feel like I can be like that. It's the only way I think you can be a successful author. And Rose is like, even when she finds herself in the middle of the desert, she's like, I've got this, when she really, really doesn't. I definitely have a lot of that in me. And I'm madly in love with Shen Lo as a character. So in that way, I really identify with Rose. But I love both the twins equally. I could never be as badass as Ren, though. I would, be terrible at that.
No, I'm not brave at all like Ren. I'm a complete coward. Yeah. It's just, I don't know. It's a funny one. There's this one character that I really could not write at all. Like, I'd have to get Katie to come into my scenes and write him. It was Prince Ansel. So pure and so innocent and so silly. And like, it's just like, he's so fun, but I just like couldn't grasp him. So it's kind of helpful, I think, in terms of who we identify with or who we can stretch to write. I feel like we have a good scope across all the characters. Maybe there's a little bit of foot in all of them.
A little bit of both. I can hear Ansel just saying, "My flower."
Yes.
Because I listened to the audio books, and just like that, the voice for him was perfect. He just seemed like kind of this goober, and just like, he was so just happy to be there.
Yeah.
But then you kind of got that he wasn't always treated, he too was a pawn, right? Yeah. And wasn't, you could tell there was like an abuse there with his brother that wasn't, it was hinted at in the way that he would talk about it. He just felt so authentic to himself as a character in every scene. And so he was one of my personal favorites, because I felt like his voice came through so clear.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed him as a character. The poor guy, he just,
No. And we know what? We started off like making him like the loser butt of the joke. And as we were writing him, I say it was mainly Katie. So I was like, I cannot do this guy. He had so much evolving humanity, but by the end we were like, oh my God, sweet Ansel. Like he ended up being such a sweet character, but yes, we won't say too more about Ansel.
I know.
You should read book 2.
Okay. I'm all on it. My question is sort of like, so we talked about, you guys each wrote, the different princess, but what's your guys' writing style overall? Like, do you really like to plot everything out? Is it really just like, we're in the mood to write this today? What did you guys find was together your writing style?
Well, I think with this one, we had to be like as organized as possible, just because when you're working with someone else, we had to make sure we knew what was happening. We, definitely with the books I do with Kat, we plot way more than anything that I would do when I'm writing on my own, or I also co-write middle grade with my husband. And so in that way, but Kat is way more organized than I am, like absolutely hands up.
I think there was no other way that we could have written it, just because we need to know what the other person is doing in the scene, like at all times, especially in books 2 and 3, when obviously they've come back together, or they know each other. But for me personally, I would love to be one of those people who can just pick a fun scene to write kind of versus what I'm feeling whenever, any given day, but I have to write chronologically. Otherwise I just like physically can't do it. I don't know. I feel like I'm very rigid in the way I write.
No, you're just very disciplined. So for example, like Kat would be like, all right, we're going to do these chapters this week. And like every day Kat would get me her chapters, and she'd write, Ren's chapters are the odd chapters and Rose are the even. And then on like Saturday night at like 3 a.m., I'm like, here's 6 of my chapters.
here's 30,000 worth. That's because Katie has 2 young children and I have a dog. So I do feel like that does feed into it.
But we always were able to kind of make that work eventually.
This episode is brought to you by our subscription. It's our To Be Read, or TBR, quarterly subscription book box. This has 3 different options, and we love that it is customizable. It's something that is unique to LitJoy that I have not seen anywhere else. The first option that you can choose from is a standard book box subscription. This will come with a beautiful special edition, completely customized book, and it also comes with the ability to customize your box with the items of your choosing. It's a really fun experience. You get to go in when it's customization week, you'll get the prompt and you get to pick one from each tier. There are 3 different tiered items. The other options are you can do a book only if you just like to add to your book collection. Again, it's like beautiful special edition book that you can add to your library. Or if you have a hard time choosing, you can get our deluxe book box subscription where you don't have to pick anything. You get one of all things included in your box. And to learn more about this, you just head to litjoycrate.com/subscribe.
I'm just giggling because I feel like probably also that lends to like your natural inclination for how you are lit up about work. Like I tend to be a slow and steady, gets the job done, and then Kelly will just rabbit hole for like 4 days. And so it's kind of like, I feel that cadence. So I'm like, I understand.
I feel like that.
Guys, are we the same people?
I know. I know. This has been surreal. So it's amazing. I know. Well, I want to know more about like how you became writers. So we've talked a lot about together, but I want to know, what was your origin story as a writer? And I'm sure it starts with an origin story as a reader. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you read growing up, what authors influenced you, and then how you kind of came to be this career.
Well, when I was very young, my mom would take my brothers and I to the library every 2 weeks to sort of pick out a stack of books. And my brothers would kind of be dragged along and never pick out anything. And I would always pick out all the books and use their allowance on as well. And so I think I kind of fell in love with reading really early. And then I went to school, I went to college, and I did an undergrad in psychology. I started a master's in health psychology because my mom is a doctor, a really hardworking, wonderful woman, incredible doctor. And I thought I would kind of try and follow in her footsteps in some way. And on the first day of the master's, I was sitting in a lecture and the professor was talking about non-specific benign chronic lower back pain. And I just slowly had this sort of a moment of awakening. I stood up and I quietly walked out of the lecture hall, and then I just walked all the way home, and I walked into my house, and my mom was there on her lunch break, and I just burst out crying, and I said, oh, my life is going down the absolute wrong path. I hate the decisions that I've been making, and this is not fulfilling. So she did what any kind of good Irish mother would do, and she brought in the local priest that's a good friend of hers, and he quoted Mary Oliver to me, and he said, what is it that you want to do with your one wild and precious life? But in a more like intense, like in my face sort of Irish way. What is it that you want to do with your one wild and precious life? And at the time, he did not credit Mary Oliver. So I thought these were his words. And I was thinking, my God, this priest is so wise. So I said to my mom that night, I really want to be a writer, but I don't want to fail. And I had failed my driving test twice. And I knew intimately that feeling of failure. And I just thought, I hate failing. But anyway, so she said, okay. And then weeks went by and she came to me and she said, you know what? I really want to do this creative writing course in the evenings. Do you think that you would come with me? I'm anxious about going by myself. And I thought, it's so annoying. Fine, I'll go with you because you're my mom. And, she emotionally manipulated me into going with her, basically. And I went with her, and it was kind of unusual because she works like 60-hour weeks. She has no free time. So she would start, the first few classes she would go with me, and I loved it. It lit me up. I loved sharing my work. I loved doing the exercises. And then after a few weeks, she would like either show up late, or she'd be like eating a sandwich in the back of class, or she'd be on her phone. She never did her homework. And I remember thinking, how did someone with such shoddy work ethic, become a doctor in the first place? Like, she's like ridiculous. And then at the end of the course, the professor came up to me and he said, listen, whatever you do next, I hope you keep writing. I think you've got like a real kernel of talent here. And I turned around to my mom and I said, I think I'm going to try and write a book. And she just gave me this really smug, meddlesome smile that Katie also has. And I realized that she had basically tricked me into sort of harnessing my true passion and finding, I suppose, the confidence to go through with it. And so the next day I enrolled in a master's in publishing. And then I started planning my first novel, which became a YA love story that came out 10 years ago and sort of began this whole path. It was a very long answer. I apologize.
No, it was a great answer.
Really fascinating.
It's an amazing story. And Kat's debut book, which is like a mafia inspired kind of love story with like lots of danger and romance. And I read it and I remember being like, before I'd even met Kat, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. She's a great writer. So it's so nice that kind of that was our initial kind of bond, to be able to read someone's work before you know them and not be kind of like, we have a lot of author friends, which is amazing, but it's hard. If you meet someone and you adore them, you're going to read their books more warmly, if that makes sense. So it's nice. I was like, I already knew you were an amazing writer. And then I met you and I liked you a lot as a person too.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit, Katie, about your origin story.
Yeah, so I always wanted to write, but to me, saying like I want to be an author felt like saying I want to be an Academy Award-winning actress. Like it seemed so unachievable. And, now I do loads of school visits. We author so much you're able to access them, whether it's online. But I had never met an author growing up, but I was always a huge reader. Also have to credit my mom as well for just really inspiring a huge love of reading in me. And I also didn't have any friends who loved reading. I think I would have benefited so much from like Book Talk and Bookstagram and finding people who loved books as much as I did. It was kind of like my own thing. And it wasn't until I went to university, really, that I met people who loved reading kind of the way that I did. But I thought I would go the literary agent route because that seemed more sensible. And I interned when I was in university. I spent a year studying in Hong Kong, which is where I met my now husband. And I interned at an international literary agency there. And I really enjoyed it. But I also realized how, much it's not just about reading and finding great books. There's a lot of business acumen that goes into it. And I was like, oh, well, actually, what I want is I want to write. And I remember when I was 20, it must have been about 20 years old. I was still in university. I was like, I'm going to start writing my first thing. And I started writing and I spent as much time as I could doing it whenever I could. And it took me 5 years to complete a manuscript. And, I didn't know, maybe even 6 years. And I knew nothing about like getting an agent or publishing or any of that. But I had finished this book and it was unclear. It was way too long. It was terrible. It was unclear if it was middle grade or YA. And I started researching like, agents. And I realized I had written something that was not in any way going to sell. But I finished a book, which I think is a really important thing for any aspiring authors. It's the finishing that. And then once you've done it once, you're like, oh, I can do it again. So I wrote something else. And I knew, and at this time, I was reading a lot of YA. It was really kind of the heyday of like amazing YA, not heyday, but like the start of really amazing YA, like Laini Taylor was a huge inspiration and influence for me. And I was like, I want to write YA. And I wrote something and I sent it to 60 agents and they all rejected it, including Claire Wilson, who I referenced. And I wrote something else, sent that out to 60 agents. And this time I moved from Hong Kong. I moved back to Hong Kong after I graduated and I moved to London. And I was like, I'm going to give myself, just try to get a job in publishing or something. So I was applying for jobs in publishing, getting all rejections, querying agents, getting all rejections. I remember one day, I think I had like 14 different rejections in my inbox. And I cried a lot and ate a lot of cake. But then I wrote as a NaNoWriMo novel, what would become my debut novel. And it was the third time I submitted to my now literary agent, Claire. And she, I remember she messaged me on Twitter actually. And she was like, I'm sorry for being so unprofessional, but our systems are down. So I'm messaging you here. Can you meet up with me in person? And she asked me on April 1st. And I was like, is this an elaborate? Like that would be really extreme. What was amazing is this was the manuscript that I ended up getting multiple offers on. But, I always share my kind of journey of getting a lot of rejections. I think people think things just kind of happen overnight. And I'm so glad that my first books, weren't ones that landed me an agent, because Claire is the perfect agent for me, and for Kat as well. So, I always say like when I do school visits, I'm like, I started writing when I was 19, seriously, and I wasn't published until I was 29. So it took 10 years for like when I was holding my book in my hands. But since then I've had, especially for middle grade books, they come out really quickly. So, I've published a lot of books since then, making up for lost time. But I was just kind of like, I'm not going to give up. I'll keep writing, until I'm 95. I'll get a book published somehow.
First of all, Kat, in your story, that just feels like that feels like the plot line to like a hero's journey rom-com. I'm like,
Yeah.
it totally does, where it's just like, and then in the meantime, you fall in love or something, you know, it's like, it's the perfect, like your mom tricking you into becoming a writer. And she's just like this, like a fairy godmother in the back of class, just not doing her homework.
And how cool that it was like, you just were immediately inspired in that class. Like, I'm not doing what I'm meant to be doing.
Yeah.
Like you just like stood up and walked out. That's amazing.
It was like a moment of clarity. And then also, Katie, I love that you share how difficult that road was, because I think that oftentimes we have so many readers, that our community's primarily readers, a few writers and authors, but I think that there's this, we tend to do this with not just writing, but everything, where we only see the rewards that were reaped at the end. And we think that like, oh, it's just so much easier for everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we get that a lot at LitJoy, where they're like, it's so fun that you just get to be in business with your best friend. Like every day must be so fun. And that means you're probably doing well if it looks like everything's easy.
Yeah.
And that's like the more work that's going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had the same thought, Alix, when I was like, oh, I'm so glad you guys were sharing your stories about it, because it's not as easy peasy as it looks. There are a few blessed authors who just started, wrote a book, and it immediately got published, but that's not the typical journey, I find. And we definitely have a lot of budding authors that, you know, follow us at LitJoy and that comment, and they love listening to these stories on our podcast because they're so relatable. And I feel like so inspired. A part of me is like, should we write a book?
No, we should. We should totally. It wouldn't be good.
4 of us should write a book.
Oh my gosh.
We should all write a book.
I was like, not going to go there, but I thought it.
4 crowns. No.
Sold.
We write a book, but like that's just what the tour is called. Is the 4 Crowns book tour.
4 queens.
Yeah.
I'm like, the branding does itself. Like,
well, and I know we giggled a little bit, Katie, when you were talking, because we bonded so much over Laini Taylor. That was our very first special edition that we ever produced, was with Laini Taylor.
I have to tell you my Laini Taylor story. So I was reading her books. I read them when I was living in Hong Kong, like I said, and I just, what she does with language is so incredible, and she's so amazing. So I, similarly became absolutely obsessed. And because I was living in Hong Kong, and Laini travels a lot. So when I started like engaging with her on Twitter, she was really kind and responded a lot. I think she was curious, about the fact that I lived abroad. And I remember when I moved to London, it so happened that it was the launch of the 3rd Daughter of a Smoke and Bone book. And she was doing an event. So of course I was like, I have to go. And I got there, and this is before I had an agent or anything. And I got there early, as you would for your favorite author. And I saw her in the street, and I recognized her because, she's very recognizable. And I said, oh, hi. And she was like, oh, you're Katherine. It was so warm and so welcoming, and like brought me in early to the event. It was so kind. And then, a few years go by, I end up signing with an agent, getting my book deal. And I sent her, she actually blurbed my very first book. And I remember like the feeling of, she was so generous with her time. And that year we ended up going on a writing retreat together. And I remember having this like out of body experience when we were in a castle in France. I was like, I'm on a writing retreat in a castle in France with Laini Taylor. I was like, what has happened in my life? And it was just this amazing like moment. Yeah, we love Laini. She's amazing. She's been very supportive of Twin Crowns as well. But Kat and I also bonded a lot over
that was like the first book we bonded over, The Daughter of Smoke and Bone, because nobody in Ireland of my friends, they're not huge readers, but none of them had read it. And I had never spoken to another soul in person about that book. And it was like this formative reading experience for me.
And I love that you guys bonded over it as well. Shout out to Laini. Laini, we love you.
I know.
Thanks, lady. I'm giggling because like several things there. Like bonding over a book is how we started LitJoy, obviously. Yeah. It was right when Sarah J. Maas's Queen of Shadows came out, which I would argue is her best book. And that's my personal favorite. Yes. And for plot, I don't know. I could argue about it if I really, if we had the time. No, but I just felt like we were lit up about fantasy literature in that moment, so much so that it really informed the formation of LitJoy. And then Laini, Strange the Dreamer came out, and we both read an arc of Strange the Dreamer. And I feel like Strange the Dreamer might be one of the best fantasy novels of all time.
Yeah. Oh, it's incredible.
And I know. Just like her lyrical, it's incredible. And so we put Laini's book in our first year of doing YA crates. We put her book in there, and then she was our first special edition. And then we've met Laini several times because of LitJoy.
She's just amazing. And the way she thinks is so unique. And that's what I love so much about her writing and just her in general is I just want to be around her all the time because the way she views the world, right? It's so magical.
I am curious though, of all of Laini's books, do you have like a favorite that she wrote?
I think Strange the Dreamer is her, like, from a tech, I respect it. I agree with you from like as a fantasy novel. I think it is almost a better book than Daughter Smoke and Bone, but Daughter Smoke and Bone has my heart, if that makes sense. So like The Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares together are incredible and what she like achieved. But like Daughter Smoke and Bone was the book that like just got my heart so much. I'm like, I respect this one in a different way. It's not the one that like I like have my just like pure feral love for in the same way.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm Daughter of Smoke and Bone as well. It's like the gateway to Laini, to the rest of the brilliance of Laini Taylor. I think at the time of my life when I read it and my age, and I think that had a lot to do with it. But I just remember being like, this is extraordinary. And there is that thing of when you're reading, even as a writer, even now, you just think, how does she think that way? It is incredible the way her mind moves in this like really impressive, like nebulous sort of way. She's extraordinary.
It's just
today, actually, Katie and I were earlier. We were like, "Which book are you going to talk about as your favorite?" So we had to divide and conquer, and we said she could take Laini, and I could have Throne of Glass series. So we could have one each if we had to pick a favorite.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much.
I know.
I'm like, this is bizarre, but it's fine. We'll just keep moving through because I'm like, it's like talking to us,
like mirrors of ourselves.
Yeah.
But we talked so much about. We've been to the UK once together, and we mentioned we're going again. But when we were there, it was like 6 years ago or something. We were both just like, "This is our land. We should come here. We need to live here."
Yeah.
And so we're just laughing because we keep trying to figure out reasons to get over there. But like one day it'll happen, and all four of us can write our 4 queen books together.
It's true. Okay, so growing up, what book do you feel like was informative of your or what ignited your passion for reading as a child then?
I was thinking about this. And I have 2 answers. I think the first book that like blew my imagination wide open was probably The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I'm not a morning person at all, but I remember sleeping with it under my pillow and waking up as early as possible just so I could read it. And that's a sign of a really good book for me. And then the other book that I adored was this book called Artemis Fowl by Owen Colfer. He's an Irish author. And it's about this sort of, so it's an Irish sort of supervillain who kidnaps fairies. And the reason that was so important because when I read it, I thought, oh, like Irish kids can also be cool and magical and not just like die in a famine, because at school, those are like the books that we would read as like really like sad, morose sort of Irish children from historical times. Beautiful, beautiful, moving books. But this was the first book that was modern and exciting, where this like Irish kid gets to be like this cool supervillain full of kind of surrounded by magic. And I thought, okay, that's like a cool thing. We can be part of that too. And I think that really captured a part of my soul early on. And like Katie was saying about Laini, so Owen Colfer, he was a huge inspiration of mine. And when my first middle grade book came out, The Stormkeeper's Island, I sent it to him and he blurbed it. And that was another moment where I was just like, oh my God, it was like a full circle crying all day with happiness.
I think that's one of my favorite things about being an author is you're able to engage, because I'm a big, obviously we're both big readers, being able to engage with authors you admire, like kind of like as your peer, and you're like, yeah, I'm an author like you, exactly. I'm not fangirling like crazy in my head. So that's been, I think, one of my favorite things about becoming an author. And then for me, the books that were hugely impactful for me, I love A Wrinkle in Time so much. And all of those books, really had a huge impact on me. I admire Madeleine L'Engle so much. I loved that those books were the first time that for a children's science fiction, they had a female heroine. I loved that they were epic in scope and magic adventures. I loved the main character was really kind of mad and angry, which you didn't see a lot in children's fiction when I was younger. But the other one that had a huge impact on me, I love the Alana series by Tamara Pierce. And those books, I just wanted to live in them. And I like those books. My first great book love was from the Alana books, George Cooper. He's a thief. And when we were writing Twin Crowns, I remember saying, to Kat, I was like, one of my like goals that I want is I would love for like someone who's just starting to read YA. Like I want to write their first book boyfriend or their first book girlfriend, because to have that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm falling in love with this fictional character. And when it happens for the first time, you don't forget your first. So we really wanted to write characters that readers would hopefully be able to fall in love with, because I remember that feeling so much. So I've never met Tamara Pierce, but I just admire her and love her greatly. So I just used to reread those books constantly. I don't know if you two read them when you were younger as well.
I did read 3 of the 4. And so growing up, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe comes up a lot for authors when we ask this question. It was so formative for so many. And then I have not read Tamara Pierce, and she just gets requested all the time by our love group, our Lunicorns. They love her work.
We just talked about this in my book club last week, actually. It was really fun. We read The Wishing Game, and I don't know if you guys have read that one, but it was so fun because it's a lot. It's all nostalgic, like childhood reads, sort of like what happens to those children who grow up with that nostalgic vibe from the books. And so I asked all my book club members to share the same question. So it was a really fun discussion. But for me, we've talked about this, but like reading these like Roald Dahl books weirdly got me totally hooked into reading, So something about the way Roald Dahl thought, I was just like, this is so magical because there's no boundaries. Like anything can go here, and just that opened up this whole world to me. And so that was like, for me, my book that got me reading. Yeah. I don't know if you have one.
I had a few. I feel like the first time, so I've been a reader since I was really little.
Yeah.
But the first time I read a book and felt like I couldn't put it down, and like it stuck with me, and it was a part of me, was when I read The Giver by Lois Lowry.
But that book's too much. It's crazy.
I know. I actually didn't start in fantasy. I was very much in this kind of dystopian. And then I read all of Orwell's books, like went right into classic dystopia. So I'm like a 10-year-old reading like 1984 and Animal Farm. and like I'm just like 100%. And that's not really what I don't read a lot of that now, but that was where I was like, oh my gosh, there's this like potential for a writer to just take me right into this other world, this other conflict. And then I just have been reading ever since.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I love that. I love The Giver too. I have such a visceral memory of reading that as a kid. And I like think about it so much now. Like I think about, it's a book that I feel like has really stayed with me. I think that's the amazing thing too about writing for young people. And Kat and I mentioned a couple times, our love is YA. We both write middle grade. And I think what's so powerful about writing middle grade is, that like you might be writing the book that could turn someone into a reader, which is like just a really like wonderful feeling.
Yes. Oh, that reminds me. We just finished interviewing Brandon Mole last week, actually. And he gets that comment so much. And even our kids have mentioned like Fablehaven is my favorite book. It's what got me into reading. Yeah. And he's just like, I can never get over that comment. Like, he's like, that is the one thing that it's like, okay, I'm going to keep writing because I love the impact I'm making, you know? And I was just thinking about it like from the flip side. I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be like my mecca as an author if like somebody told me that.
Yeah.
I know. I'm like, are we in love? We're in love. Yeah, I know. It's so fun to learn. Oh, I feel like we just talk forever.
I know.
Are you guys planning to write together more now that you've finished like the Twin Crown series? Is there more coming?
We just announced very excitingly, we are doing 2 standalone spinoffs in the world of Twin Crowns. So the trilogy is complete.
I saw that.
Twin Crowns. But we're really excited, and we're actually writing those separately and individually. So we're taking characters, we're each taking a character that you'll have met in the original trilogy, and we're kind of giving them their own romances. I'm really clear to say that like, the trilogy is complete. Because as a reader, it's really frustrating when you're like, wait, so is the series ongoing or like, no, the trilogy is complete. These are true standalones. Readers who are new to the world of Twin Crowns can start with the spinoffs. So we are doing, like I said, we like plotted them together and are like very involved, but we wrote them each separately. Because I think with co-writing, you want it to feel purposeful, like there to be a reason kind of behind why you're collaborating. So that is next up in the world of Twin Crowns. And then I think it would depend on the project. I think if we had like the right project again, we would.
Yeah, I think the reason it worked so well with Twin Crowns is because it's about twins who have these distinctly different voices. Whereas even with like the spin-offs, it wouldn't make sense to split up this one voice or this one character's romance arc. I think in the same way it might, but as Katie says, maybe she'll call me again with a great idea.
Let's end on what are you reading right now?
I just finished A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, which was amazing. And I am almost finished Bride by Ali Hazelwood.
Yes.
I was up reading till 3 a.m. last night. Oh my God. It is so good. Wow.
Yeah.
I need to read that, Kat, after hearing you rave about it.
It's amazing.
And there's also like this whole thing in there where I'm all, oh, that's interesting. I did not see that coming. Like, you know what I mean?
I think I've heard about what you're talking about, and I'm all...
It's like bizarre. Thematically, you're like, is this going to work? But then like, it just really sucked me in, I have to say.
Yeah.
I just interviewed, one of the things I'm lucky to do in London when visiting authors come often, I will do what you two are doing now. I'll interview them at like bookstores and stuff. And I just interviewed Scarlett St. Clair, who does these like Hades and Persephone retellings.
Yes.
And I loved them. I devoured them. So that was really fun for me. And on the topic about like, discovering books, it was amazing at this event. So many readers came up and said, this is the first book event I've ever been to. And they talked about how her books got them into reading again. And it was so wonderful to see that happening like with adults as well. So shout out to her and her books getting people so excited about reading. I also just finished and loved Catherine Arden's new book, In the Warm Hands of Ghosts. And it was phenomenal.
Yes.
I'm not a war book girly. I get bored of war books, but this was incredible. So I absolutely recommend that. And then next, read the Ali Hazelwood.
These are all on my TBR. So
yes, I'm just never mind. I can't keep saying it over and over again. And I'm like, answered it exactly how I would. Yeah.
Well, I love Hades Persephone retellings, and so I often read them.
It's fine.
It's fine. We're just mirrors of each other. It's great.
Okay, perfect. Kat and Katie, it was amazing to have you on the LitJoy podcast. Thank you so much. And we are really looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Yes. Thank you. We've loved getting to chat with you. It's been so fun.
This has been amazing, truly.
Thank you, reader, for listening to this episode of the LitJoy podcast. Please remember to rate and review us.
And like a good book, recommend us to your friends.